Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum, good afternoon, and Salam Ramadan. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope all is well. For your information, ICANN meetings are held 3 times a year in different regions of the globe, and for their first meeting this year, Cancun, Mexico was selected as the location for ICANN76 Community Forum. And this ICANN76 Readout session is meant to share to all the MCMC staff on the latest information about the administration and development within the DNS ecosystem that has been discussed during the ICANN76. Without further ado, let me introduce our speakers. So together with us on the line, we have Mr. Muhammad Afiq Amar, who is currently the Deputy Director of the Numbering and Electronic Addressing Management Department, MCMC. He is responsible for policy and regulatory matters over electronic addresses in Malaysia, including domain names, internet governance, and IPv6 governance. He involved with ICANN since 2019 and is currently the second alternate representative for GAC Malaysia. In 2021, he was selected as one of the fellows for the Asia Pacific Regional Internet Governance Forum, APRIGF, and is currently a member of the APRIGF Multi-Steering Group Committee. Graduated with an honors degree in law, he was an advocate and solicitor of the High Court of Malaya from 2014 to 2017. Ms. Tan Yi Chin is currently a stakeholder engagement manager at ICANN. She engages with the community in the Asia Pacific, APAC region, and facilitates their participation in ICANN's multi-stakeholder internet governance discussions. Yi Chin joined ICANN in May 2016, and prior to her current role, she was with ICANN's contractual compliance team. Yi Chin graduated with an honors degree in economics from the National University of Singapore and is certified compliance and ethics professional international. Our third speaker, Ms. Yeo Yiling. She is the manager of the legal department at Mainik Berhad. She is responsible for overseeing the policy, legal, and regulatory matters in relation to the domain name and electronic addressing and contract management. She graduated from the University of Manchester with an honors degree in law, underwent professional training at the English Bar at Gray's Inn, and is a non-practicing advocate and solicitor of the High Court of Malaya. Our last speaker, Ms. Justin Chu. She had been an active member of several GNSO policy development process working groups, including the one for the new GTLD subsequent procedures, where she served as the at-large liaison for a time. She had been selected by the ICANN nominating committee to represent the APAC region in 2019 to 2021, and currently participates as vice chair of the expedited PDP on internationalized domain names. Justin is an advocate and solicitor of the High Court of Malaya and continues to practice law in Malaysia while pursuing policy-related work in ICANN. And to start with, this is the agenda for today's My ICANN76 Readout session. First, the introduction of the speakers. Then we'll move with the first presentations by the ICANN APAC, followed by presentations by MCMC, Mainik, and after that by ALAC. Following that, we'll have the Q&A session and lastly quiz. So if you have any questions to address to our speakers, kindly drop your questions in the chat box. And with that, let's welcome our first speaker, Ms. Yi Chin. Over to you.
Thank you, Melissa. Hi, everyone. Can I get the next slide? Thank you. Yep. And thank you, MCMC, for hosting this readout session because the ICANN76 meeting was actually at a complete opposite time zone. So it was pretty hard for people in our region to attend. So I'm Yan Chin. I'm the Stakeholder Engagement Manager from the ICANN APAC Regional Office. And today I'll be sharing kind of three main sections. So the first one will be on a quick overview of ICANN and ICANN community. And then I'll touch a bit on the ICANN76 key highlights. And then also I'll go on to key initiatives in APAC after. Next slide, please. So what is ICANN? I think this is a pretty good turnout. I'm seeing 140 people. I'm pretty sure maybe at least half of the people might not know what is ICANN yet. So I'm just going to provide a quick overview here. Next slide, please. And before I talk about ICANN, I'd like to first share with you how the internet works quickly. So basically any device that you use that is connected to the internet, such as your computer, mobile phone, and even fridge and washing machines nowadays, they all have a unique number called Internet Protocol address. So this IP address actually works like a postal address. It allows you to send the relevant message that you want to send across to the correct recipient. But the problem is if we are going to remember all the IP addresses, it's not going to be useful for the human brain because it's a complex number. So we won't be able to remember that. So instead, we use domain names, which is something like example.com. And these domain names will actually resolve to the relevant unique IP addresses so that the data will be sent to the correct recipient. And all these are called unique identifiers. So there's three main unique identifiers, basically the protocol standard, the IP address, and the domain name. And for ICANN, we manage the domain name system. So next slide, please. And we are essentially the technical coordination body that coordinates the domain name system so that it works properly and people get directed to the correct website that you want to actually access. And next slide, please. Yeah, next slide. Thank you. So a quick overview on ICANN ecosystem. It's made up of three main segments. So we have the community group, which are made up of different stakeholder groups. So basically, MCMC is participating as the government. And then we also have MyNIC here, who's joining the country code site, and also ALAC, which is represented by Justine today. And then we also have the ICANN board as the second part. So these are representatives from the global community. They review and adopt the policies that are developed within the community. And then basically they pass on that to the ICANN org, which are consisted of ICANN staff like me to implement those policies. Next slide, please. So the multi-stakeholder model, ICANN works in a basically multi-stakeholder model. And in terms of formal structure, we have three supporting organizations on the left, as you see. The SOs basically develop policies based on their representation. And then on the right, you are seeing advisory committees. We have 4 advisory committees. And the ACs do not develop policies directly, but they do provide important input based on their representation during the policy development process as well. And next slide, please. So ICANN meetings, Melissa briefly touched on this a little bit, but I'm just going to recap quickly. For ICANN meetings, we hold them 3 times a year. Ideally in different regions, we try to rotate as much as we can. The first one is called the Community Forum, which is typically held February or March. And then we have the Policy Forum in June, and the Annual General Meeting, which is usually the largest in October or November. So the one that we just held is Community Forum at Cancun. Looking ahead, we are having the June meeting in DC and then the Annual General Meeting in Hamburg this year. Thank you. Next slide, please. All right, so zooming in a little bit to ICANN76, just a quick summary on numbers. We held 181 sessions, both open and closed. There were a total of 2,019 participants coming from 164 economies. And out of the 2019 participants, 1,204 were on site. The other were participating virtually. So from APAC, out of these 2,000 over participants, 13.7% were from APAC. I personally think it's a pretty good number given the opposite time zone. But of course, when it comes to closer to our region in terms of Europe or APAC, typically this percentage goes higher as well. So the breakdown of the numbers will be published in a report called the By the Numbers report, and there's a link there. If you receive the slides later, you'll be able to click on the link to see the report when it's published. Next slide, please. So on a few key highlights from ICANN76, the first one I'd like to touch upon will be on new GTLD subsequent procedures. So just a quick background on what is new GTLD. So basically, we had a round in 2012 where we expanded the domain name space, because long time ago, there used to be only .com, .net. These are called legacy generic top-level domains. But to increase competition, we opened a 2012 round for applications of different types of top-level domains. There are now about over 1,200 top-level generic top-level domains. And this includes things like even locations, for example, .london or brand.gucci, etc., etc. So after the 2012 round, there was a working group called SubPro that were discussing and reviewing the 2012 round to see what was done well and what can be improved for the next round, because we are intending to open the next GTLD round for applications. And Ms. Justin Chu here with us had been actively participating in that, so I'm pretty sure she might touch on this topic later. But in any case, just a quick summary on what a major progress that happened at ICANN76. The ICANN board adopted 98 recommendations from the final report that was developed by the SubPro working group. So this means that actually the implementation process for the next round of new GTLDs will start. On our end, ICANN, we are tasked to deliver the implementation plan no later than 1st August this year. And then ICANN is also to begin communication plan on raising awareness for the next round. So one of the key things from the last round is that we've received feedback that actually there was not enough awareness raised. So we are hoping to work with the Malaysian community to raise awareness earlier. That's why I have a question posted there on how can we work together to raise awareness among the Malaysian community. And this is a kind of longer term question, but I've posted that, so that we can start thinking about this and then start discussing as well. Next slide, please. Another key topic that made some major progress at ICANN76 is on DNS abuse. So one of the major discussion or rather highlight was on contractual provisions negotiation team. So this is actually a negotiation between ICANN contracted parties, so both registries and registrars with ICANN, to improve the provisions within the contracts that we have with the contracted parties, so that we can all better address and mitigate DNS abuse issues. Also, there has been increased availability of tools within the community. So for example, there's a DNS Abuse Institute entity. They've developed something called NetBeacon, which is a one-stop shop for abuse reporting and shows abuse feeds for registrars. And then we also have the ACID tool that's developed by the registrar stakeholder group. And also, a key thing is that within the community, most of the stakeholder groups are now discussing this topic. Used to be some of the community groups weren't really actively discussing it, but at ICANN76, all of the stakeholder groups were discussing this topic. And also, it's moving towards a direction where it's focused on data gathering and data-driven discussions, which is great. And also, we have increased collaboration across GTLDs and CCTLDs on this topic now. Next slide, please. Another key topic, this was a plenary session during ICANN76. I'll call it WSIS plus 20. In short, the UN General Assembly will conduct a review in 2025 on the outcome of the WSIS, and this is called WSIS plus 20. In essence, what it does is review of internet governance from the past 20 years, basically to discuss whether the multi-stakeholder works and whether we want to continue with that. We've seen a lot of success with the multi-stakeholder model. So, hopefully this will continue. But of course, governments will need to start to think and review next steps and provide their input at WSIS plus 20 on how, internet governance will look like in the next few years. And next slide, please. And then zooming in a little bit into APAC at ICANN76, we held an APAC GAG session. So this is really kind of like an informal meeting among the APAC GAG that were present. We had 11 attendees from 6 economies. So it's really just for networking and to hold kind of informal conversations on focus topics related to internet governance. During this GAG session, this face-to-face APAC GAG session, the key topics discussed include APAC engagement and regional collaboration. So they actually talked about submitting a potential collective APAC input for the current reviews as well. So I mentioned about WSIS Plus 20, and then there's also another initiative called Global Digital Compact. And also another key topic was on next steps for SAPRO and new GTLD. This is a focus topic for GAC, which I'm sure Afiq will share later. So they were discussing on this as well. And also just very high-level topics such as the challenges that they're facing. So even someone raised actually that it's very hard to explain what is ICANN because she was trying to cross the immigration. And then basically she was saying that I'm going to attend an ICANN conference, and the person asked her, so the immigration officer asked her, what is ICANN? And she found it very difficult to explain in a few sentences. So we're definitely going to work on this from our side, from staff. We'll share a little bit on how we can describe this very quickly so that, people can get to know what's ICANN in just a few minutes or less than that. And then also one of the challenges that are faced by Pacific economies is typically that's limited resources or funding. So they find it difficult to attend a lot of meetings. Right, next slide, please. With that, I'll move on to key initiatives in APAC. One of the key focus areas is definitely on universal acceptance and internationalized domain names. So internationalized domain names basically is domain names in different scripts and languages. And then universal acceptance is the acceptance through browsers and apps for all types of domain names and email addresses, including IDNs. We held the Global Universal Acceptance Day. This is the first time we hold a UA Day. Yesterday, actually, in New Delhi, India. And with this UA Day initiative, we are actually holding a lot of local and regional events as well. So Malaysia, in fact, hosted by MCMC as well. We will have the local UA Day in Malaysia on 10th May. So just a quick touch on that. For Malaysia, we do have the Arabic IDN CCTLD, which is operated by MyNIC. And then APAC DNS Forum 2023. This year, we're holding the second APAC DNS Forum. It will be in Hong Kong from 4th to 5th July. We would like to invite all of you, if you can, to come and join us. The APAC DNS Forum last year, just a quick reminder, we held the first one with MyNIC. So we were very proud that, we were holding it with the Malaysian CCTLD. This year, we're holding it with .hk. Some of the key topics that we're looking at will be on digital outlook for APAC, cybersecurity, and future of the DNS. We are going to be announcing the registration details in April, so look out for that. And next slide, please. Some other areas that we're looking into, capacity building has always been our focus area. So the Asia Pacific Internet Governance Academy, we're holding the 6th edition this year. It's targeted to be held end of July, and we're opening applications in May. So also I encourage anyone here interested to apply. Just a quick update on the application criteria. This is a youth program. The target age group is between 18 to 35 years old inclusive, and it's actually a 5-day capacity building program on topics of internet governance. And then DNS security topics, of course, continues to be our key focus area as well. We are holding a lot of DNS security related technical training in this region. We used to have annual training partnering MCMC. We held one last year virtually. We're still discussing if anything will happen this year, but definitely we'll continue to collaborate. And then also some of the ICANN projects on DNS security related topics. A new one would be kindness here that I've included. It touches upon best practices for DNS providers. So I definitely encourage you to take a look on what this is. And also from ICANN, we continue to participate in regional and local internet governance forums. So quick snapshot of upcoming events this year. APNIC 56 will be held in Kyoto, 7 to 14th September, and then APTLD 84 for CCTLDs will be held in Seoul, 19 to 20th September. APRIGF this year as well, I think it's going to be held in end August, but pending announcement. And then Global IGF will be held in Kyoto, 8 to 12 October. So we're going to be really busy in the period of end August to October. And that's it from me. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, or if you have time to address those later, I'll be happy to. Thank you. Back to you, Melissa.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Eugene. Now let's move on to our second speaker, Afiq.
Thank you, Melissa. Assalamualaikum and good afternoon. Thank you to KMRC for allowing us to share some inputs today related to the ICANN meeting. As spoken by Melissa, this session is a great opportunity for us to have a brief knowledge and understanding of what ICANN is, the matters that falls under its purview, and why it's important for us to participate in the ICANN meeting. As the alternate representative for Malaysia, I will be speaking from the perspective of the GAG to share what had been discussed, the highlighted topics, and moving forward action, especially those related to Malaysia. But before we move further, kindly let me introduce a little bit about the organization structure for NEMD. Yep, which is a department under the Licensing and Monitoring Division led by Ms. Stella Jivamani Navaratnam. And NEMD is headed by Mr. Ruzamri Rwandi, comprising of 8 officers altogether covering functions stipulated under Chapter 2 of Part 7 of the Communications and Multimedia Act, basically on numbering and electronic addressing. In addition to that, NEMD is also entrusted to govern licensing activities for digital signatures and assess the applications for e-commerce tax exemption. So as you can see, Melissa, Hazira, and I undertaking the electronic addressing governance functions, which include domain names and internet governance. So that briefly explains NEAMD's involvement in ICANN and other international meetings or platforms that are related. Next. As for ICANN, my friend Yuqin had done a tremendous job in explaining what ICANN is, so trying to not be more expert than the real expert. What can I say about ICANN is actually it's derived from a multi-stakeholder effort representing various communities and interests. All of them will gather, discuss, and develop policies on one mission to make the internet stable, secure, and interoperable. So as we break the bias and celebrate women's empowerment, ICANN is one of the organizations that is currently led by women. So we have Tripti Sinha as the chairman of the ICANN board and Ms. Sally Costaton as the interim president and the CEO. So, well, the good news is that ICANN is currently looking for a new president and a new CEO, should any of you would like to apply for that position. Next. So ICANN is made up of several groups known as either advisory committees or supporting organizations. So these groups represent the larger form of stakeholders that could contribute to ICANN's process in developing policies to coordinate the unique identifiers of the internet. So these groups are comprises of 4 advisory committees: the Governmental Advisory Committee, At-Large Advisory Committee, Security and Stability Advisory Committee, and also the Root Server System Advisory Committee. And we have 3 supporting organizations: country code name supporting organization, generic names supporting organization, and also the address supporting organizations. For the GAG, GAG is an advisory committee comprising of governments and governmental organizations which play a significant role in the ICANN, which we provide advice on public policy, which is possibly connected to national or international laws or agreements. And GAG advice will have a strong presumption and influence for the ICANN board to consider before making any decisions, which if not, the ICANN board will have to provide justifications and the later decision must be agreed upon in consensus. So currently we have 181 members under the GAG and 38 observers. Next. Okay. So the GAG is currently headed by Mr. Nicolas Caballero of Paraguay, assisted by 5 vice chair: Francisco Bahiro of Burundi, Zina Buhab of Lebanon, Ola Bergstock from Sweden, Nigel Hickson from United Kingdom, and also Mr. Wang Lang from China. So this is all the incoming GAG leadership to replace the outgoing GAG leadership since the end of ICANN76. Just for information, Mr. Wang Lang of China has just been elected as the vice chair to replace Mr. Shi Yong Chang of South Korea, who had withdrawn himself from the position earlier. As for Malaysia, the main representative would be Mr. Zulkarnain Muhammad Yassin, MCMC's Chief Regulatory Officer, whilst Mr. Muzamri, Rwandi, and myself as the alternate representatives. And as you can see at the right side of the presentation, this is the meeting schedule for the GAC. Only during ICANN76, it is packed with sessions comprising of capacity buildings, main meeting sessions, cross-group sessions, and also the communicate drafting sessions. So for capacity building session, it is a session exclusively for newcomers and also a refresher course for existing members to know more about GAC, about the GAC history, about the GAC interest topics, and also the GAC members to connect to each other. And then we have the main meeting sessions is for the GAC to discuss its topics of interest. I will discuss these topics of interest later. And then we also have the cross-group sessions, which is the interaction sessions with other groups, such as the GNSO, the ALAC, the CCNSO, and etc. And then we have the communicate drafting sessions, which act for the GAC members to deliberate and finalize the GAC communique. The GAC communique is actually a document that is established and published at the end of each meeting to act as a summary of what had been discussed and what are the proposed actions by the GAC. Next. Okay, so at ICANN76, we have 4 topics that are significant to us. So the first one is DNS abuse. So DNS abuse may be defined as the use of domain names or the DNS protocol to carry out harmful or illegal activities. For the GAC, protecting the public from DNS abuse is an important public policy issue. If the public is to trust and rely upon the internet for communications and transactions, those tasked with administering the DNS infrastructure must take steps to ensure that this public resource is safe and secure. So therefore, the GAC continuously discussing and supporting the initiatives to mitigate the DNS abuse. And one of them is by improving the contractual obligations of the contracted parties for them to take better action to mitigate DNS abuse. So among the improvements that are being considered currently, there are 4, which is the financial and reputation to introduce financial and reputational incentives for the registries to adopt proactive measures or for those without any abusive domains. And the second one is to establish thresholds of abuse at which a higher threshold leads to a presumption that the registries and registrars are not in full compliance with their agreements. And then the third one is the establishment or the installation of best practices for mitigating the DNS abuse. For this case, we have to conduct a research and further study to identify the best practices for mitigating DNS abuse. And the last one is to establish a central DNS abuse complaint portal, which act as a one-stop center for us to address complaints relating to DNS abuse. Next. So the second topic will be the new generic top-level domain program. The new GTLD program is actually initiated to foster the expansion of the DNS via the introduction of new GTLDs. This program is aimed to enhance innovation, competition, and consumer choice within the DNS ecosystem. So it has first initiated in 2012, whereby 1,930 applications were received. Out of that numbers, 1,241 were delegated, 646 withdrawn, 39 rejected, and 4 pending considerations. So with the new GTLD program is expected to be reinitiated soon, the GAC raised some concerns and advised ICANN to take all the necessary steps and reviews before a new round of GTLDs being initiated. In the meantime, at our level, for information, a new provision had also been incorporated recently under the Numbering and Electronic Addressing Plan. This provision mainly requires any person that initiate or introduce a new GTLD concerning geographic names in Malaysia to acquire a prior non-objection letter from MCMC as the appropriate authority under sections 1791 of the CMA 1998. So basically, this is also in line with the GTLD applicant guidebook issued by ICANN. Next. So for WHOIS and data management, I will first explain what is WHOIS. So WHOIS is a protocol used to find details and relevant information related to domain names. So this includes the registrant's contact details, the website's host, and the network provider. So WHOIS is mainly used for assisting law enforcement agencies in investigations, mitigate the abusive use of internet, assist internet users in any illegal activities, combat infringement and misuse of intellectual property, and also contribute to user confidence in the internet. So recently, ICANN has initiated the development process, and we will soon proceed with a proof of concept of a system of WHOIS disclosure system that will simplify the process of submitting and receiving requests for GTLD registration data. So for us as a regulator as well as a law enforcement agency in Malaysia, this is a great news that may help us in the future for our investigation and enforcement activities, I believe. Next. And then universal acceptance. The discussion about the universal acceptance in the 76 ICANN meeting was actually went around the organization of the UA Day, as mentioned by Eugene, which will be celebrated through 53 different programs worldwide, including Malaysia. So this year, New Delhi, India was selected as the venue for the official global UA Day that held yesterday on 28th of March 2023. So for those MCMC staff, you have received an email, I believe, from Strategic Comms Division, which appended an info kit about the UA Day, which for Malaysia, MCMC will organize MyUAD 2023 on 10th of May 2023 in collaboration with ICANN and MyNIC. So the MyUAD 2023 is organized with an aim to spread UA awareness and readiness at the national level and educate relevant stakeholders about the potential of the UA. So as a multiracial and multicultural nation, this is a continuous effort to create a more inclusive digital society and also to bridge the digital divide. Next. So, yep, save the date. MyUAD will be held on 10th of May 2023 at Center of Excellence MCMC in Cyberjaya. Next. So I think that's all from me. If you have any questions, do feel free to drop the questions in the chat box. Thank you. Back to you, Mel.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Afiq. Let's have Miss Yo from MyNIC. Over to you.
Thank you, Melissa. Good afternoon, everyone. Miss Yo here from MyNIC. I am the manager of legal. So basically, I will like to talk a little bit about MyNIC before I introduce this afternoon session, make an introduction on the Country Code Name Supporting Organization, CCNSO. Next slide. Okay, just to share something about MyNIC. We are an agency under the Ministry of Communication and Digital, same ministry as our regulator, MCMC. We are a government agency under the ministry KKD, and we are a company that's limited by guarantee. We have no shareholdings. We are governed by a board of directors. We have three, we have our Chief Executive Officer, Dato' Technologist Hasno Fadli Hassan, and two chiefs, Chief Operating Officer, Puan Nora Fiza, and our Chief Digital Enablement Officer, Encik Faris. We are the registry and registrar for the .my country code top level domain for Malaysia. And we are part of Malaysia's Critical National Information Infrastructure, CNII, which also includes the airlines and banking sectors. So for .my, we are one of the key enablers of the digital economy ecosystem here in Malaysia. And our focus is to develop and promote the use of .my amongst Malaysians. So our goal, basically vision, is for every Malaysian entity, every Malaysian individual to enable them to basically have their digital identity online through a .my CCTLD. So we do strive to empower businesses and industries to become part of this digital economy. So we hope to develop the domain name industry further as part of the ICT infrastructure here in Malaysia. Next slide. So at a glance, these are the 6 categories of domain names that we make available. We consider this an open category, which is available through our registrars. We manage and maintain 4 under the closed category for gov.my, mil, edu, and coop.my. So thanks to MCMC, basically biz.my was introduced 2 years ago. coop.my also about 2 years ago. So MyNIC, we are registered the second level, mynic.my, and MCMC has the Klik dengan Bijak program. So that one is registered at the second level of .my. Our ministry, Kementerian Komunikasi Digital, they have their acronym KKD that's registered at the third level of gov.my. And of course, we have University Malaya, that's registered at the third level of edu.my. So they have their website address, um.edu.my. We currently accept applications for domain names at the second level in 3 scripts: Jawi, Chinese, and Tamil. We also basically, as part of the registry of managing and maintaining .my, we have the database of all the registrants who've registered .my in Malaysia. We also basically run a WhoIs service. Currently, our WhoIs service, we do not display the names of the registrant, the administrative, billing, and technical contact. So that information is not made available. This is in accordance and in compliance with the Personal Data Protection Act of Malaysia, and also in compliance with our own data protection policy. We also provide the DNS resolution services. As part of the value-added services from MyNIC, we created the domain name dispute resolution policy under the .my/MyDRP. That is administered separately. And we also basically, as part of our registrar services, we provide the online registration services as the registrar for Malaysia, and customer care and reseller support as well. Next slide. Okay, so going into CCNSO, the Country Code Name Supporting Organization, I'll be basically using a lot of abbreviations in the next subsequent slides. As explained by Yanchin earlier, CCNSO is one of the 3 supporting organizations within the ICANN structure that's created for and by CCTLD managers worldwide. So CCNSO works as a global platform for the CCTLD managers. They meet and discuss on topics, issues of concern. They build consensus, technical cooperation, and facilitate the development of voluntary best practices for CCTLD managers. So in the CCNSO context, they develop and recommend global policies to the ICANN board, but for a very limited set of issues that's related to CCTLDs. And this example basically would be the introduction of internationalized domain name CCTLDs, the IDN CCTLDs, as Yanchin highlighted earlier in her slide, which was .Malaysia in Jawi. So that's currently managed and maintained by MyNIC. We have not operationalized it yet at the second level. So the string is only active at the top level. And another global policy that the CCNSO looks at is the retirement of CCTLDs. So currently, MyNIC, we are the 110th member of CCNSO. There's a total of 173 members currently who are members of CCNSO, and 5 of the countries are basically within the ASEAN region. Thailand, Vietnam, Philippines, Laos, Brunei, they are also members of CCNSO. Next slide. Okay, so basically these are the essentials from ICANN76. I just want to touch briefly on 5, and I want to emphasize a little bit more on DNS abuse landscape, because that's a hot topic now. And there's going to be a lot of acronyms, so I'll try basically to run through and provide the full names of each of these committees and organizations. Next slide. Okay, for universal acceptance, from the CCNSO perspective, they're coming up with a draft roadmap. And one of the outcomes from their committee was basically that anything to do with universal acceptance, readiness, and practices for and by CCTLDs, the agenda is to be included as part of the CCNSO Tech Day or the CCNSO news session. There is a working group committee that's looking at universal acceptance, and they are looking to assist CCTLDs with universal acceptance and email address internationalization. So they're looking to promote and advance IDN compliance, universal acceptance readiness, and they are also liaising, this working group is liaising with the other relevant ICANN groups, including the Universal Acceptance Steering Group, the Government Advisory Committee IDN Working Group, and the ICANN Board IDN Universal Acceptance Working Group. And they're looking to activate a liaison from CCNSO to the Universal Acceptance Steering Group. Next slide. For the governance session, I just wanted to share that they are proposing two processes at the moment. That's the statement of interest and conflict of interest processes. And they are also looking basically to introduce future guidelines on the roles and responsibilities of council members within CCNSO and the implementation of policies that's specific to the CCNSO community. Some of the previous work that the Governance Review Committee has done was to introduce guidelines for the nomination of ICANN board members and guidelines on the rejection action process. So in terms of CCNSO, currently they are looking into the implementation of policies that are developed through something called a policy development process within the CCNSO organization itself. Next slide. Okay, briefly, during the ICANN76 meeting, there were two sessions held amongst the CCTLD community. One was just a general session with updates from the country codes from Argentina, South Africa, Canada, the Czech Republic, Russia, and Turkey. So the second session was to discuss how the CCTLDs globally are affected by the digital divide. The definition was given here basically that this digital divide covers a broad range of social differences in relation to access to and the use of digital equipment and services. The country codes that were part of this panelists were from Brazil, France, Rwanda, Indonesia, and Canada. Next slide. Okay, in terms of understanding the DNS abuse landscape within the CCTLD community, there is a abuse standing committee that was set up. They held a working session during ICANN76, and we participated in a survey that was launched by this committee. And this survey was basically to understand the CCTLD landscape with respect to handling all these various aspects of DNS abuse. We were part of the 13 CCTLDs within the Asia, Australia, Pacific region that participated in the survey. So just share with the attendees of this TeaTalk session, the outcome of the survey was there were 57 unique responses from the 316 CCTLDs that are delegated with IANA under ICANN. Over 80% of the respondents mentioned that they collaborate with either their national computer security incident response teams. Here in Malaysia, it would be the MICERT team, law enforcement agencies, or trusted notifiers. And another outcome of the survey was that there's no one size fits all for all this 57 CCTLDs. The landscape is very diverse. And part of the goal basically for conducting this survey was to increase the understanding and awareness of issues that's pertaining to DNS abuse. Okay, next slide. Okay, just wanted to share about this review mechanism that is going to be put to a vote amongst the CCTLD members. So this is the country code policy development process, the third process. They're coming up basically to develop a proposed mechanism that's pertaining to the delegation, the transfer, revocation, and retirement of top-level domains that are delegated, which are associated with country codes that are assigned to countries and territories in the ISO 31661 standard. So the members basically will be asked to vote on the proposed policy on this review mechanism. And the voting period is from 18th April next month onwards to the 9th of May. So MINIC basically will be looking out for the opportunity to participate in this voting process. And it's also basically what's happening is that they would want to inform the community about their policy proposals before the final report is submitted to the CCNSO Council. And the Council is expected to vote on the recommendation to adopt this proposed policy. Next slide. Okay, so I wanted to conclude by just raising 3 points. One is that we respect the ICANN global consensus process. We will continue to reference, we will continue to consider the ICANN supported policies, including any that may be initiated from the CCNSO organization. CCNSO basically operates in an independent process. The policies developed are not binding on members who are CCTLDs, because for .my, for MyNIC, we are governed by our respective national laws. In our case, I think as mentioned by Afiq earlier, .my is regulated and governed under the Communications and Multimedia Act of 1998, and we're also subject to other acts in Malaysia, such as the Personal Data Protection Act as well. And for MyNIC, because we're also a company limited by guarantee, we are governed under the Companies Act 2016. So just wanted to acknowledge and thank the ICANN APAC office, regional office in Singapore, Mr. Lau Jiarong and Ms. Tan Yenchin, for co-hosting the inaugural APAC DNS Forum last year. We basically managed to exchange our knowledge and experience on a lot of developments in terms of regulatory policy and technological in the DNS domain name industry, system industry in the Asia Pacific region. I'd like to thank MCMC as well for supporting this inaugural forum. And in terms of universal acceptance of IDNs, international domain names, I think there is basically room for us to engage with developers, social media sites and platforms, because in terms of trainings, I think there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of the usability of internationalized domain names. We do make Jawi, Chinese, and Tamil scripts available at the second level of .my, but when it comes to the usability of these IDNs, the support is not there yet in terms of email, web registration platforms. I remember basically we had a registration platform for the APAC DNS Forum last year. And unfortunately, the developer for that registration platform was not able to support other internationalized domain name scripts when they wanted to register for to attend the forum. So basically, we are looking also in terms of usability, we're also looking at cooperating with other local authorities here in Malaysia to create more demands for IDNs and the use of local languages, the use of Chinese, Jawi, Chinese, and Tamil scripts. Okay, I think that's basically, thank you very much for giving MyNIC this opportunity to present. And back to you, Melissa. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Yeo. Moving forward to our fourth and last speaker, Ms. Justin Chu, over to you.
Thank you, Melissa. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Justine Chu. I am representing the group of end users, the community of end users in ALAC. Firstly, I'd like to thank the organizers for giving us the opportunity to make the ALAC and the at-large known in this session, and to MCMC. In particular, I'd like to thank Encik Muhammad Afiq for the invitation for today's session, and as well as Yenchin for connecting us. All right, so I kind of have to explain certain things as I go along, but the beauty about going last is that, you hopefully, a lot of the acronyms and a lot of the backgrounds has been covered by the previous speakers, so hopefully it makes my job a lot easier. But I'm going to try and avoid using acronyms as much as possible, but forgive me if I slip into that practice, because with those of us have been in ICANN for a long time, you just can't help using acronyms because the names are so long, right? Okay, can I have the next slide, please? So I was only, we only have 15 minutes. I only have 15 minutes to get through a lot of things. So I have to pick and choose what I want to really highlight. And first of all, I would probably give you, I would like to give you an introduction on what is the at-large advisory community, as well as the at-large community. There is a difference between the two. And then I was also asked to give an update on what the ALAC and the at-large community were discussing during ICANN76. So I'm going to touch on a few of these things, as you see on the screen. And I am also going to talk a little bit about the regional interest within the Asia Pacific. I would be remiss if I don't mention this. Okay. So next slide, please. Right. So I think, Yenchin and even Afiq has already mentioned the structural background to ICANN. So I have a slightly different diagram, but it's essentially the same. Okay? So I just wanted to highlight that in terms of how ICANN is structured as an organization, and mind you, they are a non-profit organization that's registered in the US, right? So they do have constitution of what's called the ICANN bylaws, right? So within the bylaws itself, you can see there are a number of all these entities that's named, is actually specified in the bylaws. So we have the supporting organizations, 3 of them already mentioned, right? ASO, CCNSO, and GNSO. Then we have the advisory committees, also already mentioned, 4 of them, the ALAC, GAC, the RSEC, and the ESSEC. Right? So the full names are on the screen, so I don't have to regurgitate them for you, right? And of course, we also have, sorry, can you go back a little bit? Can you go back one up first, please? Can you? Right. So, and of course, in terms of the governance itself, we have the ICANN board that is ultimately responsible for the ICANN as an organization. And then we have people like the Ombuds department, as well as NOMCOM, that strives to keep the ICANN multi-stakeholder model inclusive, representative, and accountable. All right, thank you, Melissa. Sorry, Zalina. Next slide, please. Okay, so what is the difference between the ALAC, which is the At-Large Advisory Committee, and the At-Large Community, or simply called the At-Large, right? So from a governance point of view, the ALAC, or the At-Large Advisory Committee, is actually a 15-member committee that represents the at-large community. So the ALAC acts like an executive body for the at-large community, and they take on the function of being the primary body for raising the voice and concerns of individual internet users. Right? And the membership of this 15-member community is actually drawn from the at-large community, and the at-large community itself, it's divided into regions. So you can think of the at-large as the community of end users who participate in ICANN processes and ICANN activities. And then among these members of the at-large community, right, we select 15 people to be the executive committee, be on the executive committee, which is called the ALAC, right? And the at-large global regions, there are 5 of them. We don't follow the UN type, regional dispersion. We have our own kind of thing. And I am from the Asia Pacific or the Asia, Australasia, and Pacific Islands region. So that's APIRALO. So I am also the ALAC liaison to the GNSO, the Generic Name Supporting Organization. So I straddle between the ALAC and the GNSO. And part of the reason for that is because I have been active in GNSO policy development for a long time. So I kind of understand what goes on in GNSO. Next slide, please. Okay, so just moving on to what we as a community discussed in ICANN76. I'm just going to touch on 2 because I'm quite wary of the time. First one is subsequent procedures, which simply put is the way I define it is it's the set of rules that will apply for the next round of applications for new generic top-level domains. So Yanchin mentioned that there was a round in 2012. That was the last round, in fact, and then we've had a long time lag between that round and the next round to basically have this policy development process, which looked at the rules that applied in the 2012 round, and then to see what are the deficiencies, what are the gaps, what needs to be introduced, what needs to be fixed. And that particular process actually took about 5 years, since 2016, I believe, and it ended in 2021, right? And the recent development for this particular area of subsequent procedures is that at the last day of the ICANN76 meeting on 16th of March, the ICANN board actually resolved to move preparations for the program forward, but they did it in kind of tiered manner, right? So the policy development process for subsequent procedures actually came out with, over, I think, close to 300 outputs. And Yenchin mentioned a lower number because I think she's talking about recommendations. But within the policy development processes, we have recommendations, we have affirmations, and we have implementation guidance. Now, I'm not obviously going to go into the details like that, but that is why you see on my slide that it's actually 260 outputs, because outputs cover all these three types of recommendations, implementation guidance, and affirmations. So there were about over 300 of them out of the subsequent procedures policy development process. Now the board has gone ahead and adopted about 260 of them. So the ones that have been adopted will now move into what we call the implementation phase, right? So there will be a separate process, and then there will be another implementation review team set up that will help ICANN.org implement those policies. The board also marked 38 of the outputs. So outside of the 260, there were another 38 that the board marked as pending. So there were still some clarifications needed to be done before the board decides whether to accept them or not. Right? And then, of course, there's an acknowledgement that there are still ongoing work that contributes or impact on subsequent procedures, the rules for the next round. And these include the applicant support program, closed generics, IDN variant management, DNS abuse, and name collisions. I obviously haven't got time to actually go into depth about what all these cover, but I'm happy to, have questions thrown at me later or even after the session. Right? In terms of what the ALAC has been discussing and what it plans to do is off the back of advice given. So remember that ALAC is one of the advisory committees. So although we don't develop policies, which is for the generic names, at least it's the realm of the generic name supporting organization, the GNSO. So although at large and ALAC don't develop policy, we do participate in the development policy processes of GNSO, right? And we have, as an advisory committee, the obligation and in fact the right to establish or issue advice to the board on especially certain matters that pertain to end user interests. Right, so we did have an advice that was issued back in 2021 on subsequent procedures. The link is there, so I invite you to have a look at what we actually advised the board on, right? And in terms of, because the resolution has gone ahead to move subsequent procedures into the next round, some of it, well, a major part of it anyway, into implementation. So the ALAC is discussing what it wants to prioritize in terms of the asks that it made to the board for elements on subsequent procedures. So that is still, it's an ongoing process, and we are continuing conversations with the board, in fact, on the piece of advice that we've given them. Right, and I would also like to highlight that the advice and the inputs that the ALAC came up with on subsequent procedures were also in collaboration with the GAC. Right, so I personally worked with the GAC topic leads on subsequent procedures in terms of what the GAC and what the ALAC thought on certain things on common ground. Right. So you will go back and look at some of the GAC communique and even GAC advice, you will see the GAC has mentioned ALAC advice or ALAC's point of view on certain elements of subsequent procedures. Right. So moving ahead, we will, as I said, we will continue the conversation with the ICANN board on our advice given, and especially pertaining to the 38 pending outputs, because the board is still open to receiving inputs from community participants. We are heavily invested and participating in all the ongoing work that I mentioned before: applicant support, closed generics, IDN variant management, DNS abuse, and name collisions. Right, and we are certainly going to be participating in the implementation review team. That is the group that is set up to help guide ICANN.org to implement the policies that have been adopted for subsequent procedures. Next slide, please. Okay, so the next key topic that I want to talk about is DNS abuse mitigation. So, and it's great that, the previous speakers have already talked about this in quite a lengthy way. I just want to highlight a few things. One is that the way ICANN has defined DNS abuse is quite limited or quite specific, right? And that is to say that, they're looking at 5 broad categories of harmful activities, which is botnets, malware, farming, phishing, and spam, as spam is used to, as the channel to propagate DNS security threats. Right? And there is a reason for this narrow definition, right? Because it's actually defined or developed by the contracted parties, which is the registrars and the registries. Yeah. And the reason for that is because these two groups in the contracted parties have got limits in terms of what they can do to combat DNS abuse. And for example, content or websites is not something that they can easily deal with. So if somebody puts up abusive content on a website, it's not something that can be dealt with easily by the registrar or the registry. And also within the ICANN bylaws, content is outside the remit of ICANN. Right. So in terms of the ALAC interventions, we are one of the parties that have been constantly advocating for the definition of DNS abuse to not be static, to continue to evolve, and so that we don't know that in the future there's going to be other forms of abuse. So we don't want to be sort of cornered into saying that we don't care about other abuses. So we're, as I said, we're one of the groups that are constantly saying that we can look at DNS abuse or combating DNS abuse in a narrow manner for the time being, but you must not close the door to other forms of abuse in future that might come up. Yeah. And we also have given advice on DNS abuse to the board, right? And DNS abuse mitigation is likely going to be prioritized as one of our must-do before the next round is launched. And also, we acknowledge that there are other efforts ongoing in different parts of the ICANN community to do with DNS abuse mitigation. And the last point you see there, domain name registration, data accuracy and access, that also helps with DNS abuse, because number one, we need to be able to establish that someone who registers a domain name is actually the person that is controlling the domain. So for example, even if you want to take down an abusive mechanism through that domain name, you have to be able to identify and contact that person. Right? And the access part of it is what the previous speakers talked about, the impact of GDPR on personal data protection. So that what we're saying is that there is a legitimate purpose for getting access to that registration data. So for example, IP lawyers and legal side, enforcement side, they need to do something about combating serious abuse. So they need to be able to find out who it is that registered domain and who's controlling it. Right. And moving on, can I move to the last slide, please? Right. So universal acceptance. I don't think I have to explain what universal acceptance is now, because the other speakers have touched upon it. Yes, so the inaugural Universal Acceptance Day was yesterday, 28th of March, but it's not just yesterday. There are 53 events around the world in 46 countries, in fact, that is celebrating this inaugural Universal Acceptance Day. And as has been mentioned already, Malaysia is going to do their part on the 10th of May via an event organized by MCMC. Now, I just want to end on the part on internationalized domain names, in particular IDN variant management. So I, as one of my other roles, I'm also vice chair of the GNSO expedited policy development process on internationalized domain names. Oh, that's a long mouthful, so that's why acronyms come in very handy. And that is the EPDP on IDNs. Now, that particular working group, it's a policy working group, and it's under the auspices of the GNSO, the generic names. And they are charged with coming out with policies that will handle variant management. And what is variance? Okay, so the question is, what are variants? The easiest way to explain what a variant is, or concept of variant, is if you imagine a word in Chinese, Mandarin, right, the written form of Mandarin, which is the Han script, right? We have the simplified Chinese and we have the traditional Chinese. So one word, the same word, can be written in two ways, right? But from an end user perspective, it's the same word, although it's written differently. So that is an argument to be made for them, these two words to be known as variants, because they are actually identical. They're not synonyms, but they're identical words, just written in different ways. So now hopefully by the next round, we will be able to introduce variants so that you can apply for variants at the top level, and then it goes down to the second level as well. The policy should cascade down. So yeah, so it's very important for our region because we are probably the most multi-racial and multi-ethnic region in the world, sorry, and therefore variance is important to us. Okay, so and just wanted to mention that from a CCNSO perspective, Ms. Yeo has already mentioned that CCNSO works independently from the GNSO, because CCNSO, the parties that are active as CCNSO is basically the national, governed by national laws. So they're not beholden to any sort of contractual policies, not like the contracted parties under the GNSO. But I believe that the CCTLD side also is looking at introducing variants. And I just wanted to mention that the EPDP on IDNs, which is on the GNSO side, do talk to the CC side, which is the IDN CC-PDP4, to make, and that's at the request of the ICANN board, by the way, to ensure that whatever policies that we come up with are consistent to the point that they can be, and so that it doesn't introduce confusion at the end of the day when we introduce all these variants into the root. Okay, I think I will end there and hand the mic back to Melissa, I guess. And feel free to contact me. I've given my email address on the slides. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Justine. And thank you again to all our speakers for the informative and comprehensive presentation. Since we are running out of time right now, so we shall pass the Q&A session. But if you do have any further questions, you may just drop us an email that will be shared in the chat box. So for our next quiz session, I shall pass over to Ms. Aisha from KMRC. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. So to all MCMC staff, we'll be having our usual TeaTalk at MCMC quiz session. I'll be sharing my screen in a moment. Hold on, please. www.mnc.com and enter in the code there, or you can just scan the QR code. Question number 3, ready everyone? Fill in the blanks. Yep, actually all three answers are all correct. Strawberry. Okay, question 4. This question should be easy for everyone. Okay, so moving on to the last one. Okay, last question, everyone. Come on. Check out who's the top 5. 1463 is the winner. Number 1, number 2 is 1396. Can I ask for number 3 to give us your staff ID via the chat, please?